This is the most emotionally intelligent generation that's come up. They have had different kinds of tools than we did, right? We were told to just go work, you were lucky, and suck it up, right? They understand work-life balance. However, what's incumbent upon us is to really help them understand their own strengths. They have strengths.
There are opportunities for our work and careers everywhere, if you know where to look. That's easier said than done, especially in our fast-paced and constantly changing world. Ann Faremouth is talking to experts, employers, and job seekers to bring you insight and understanding about what's possible. This is Career Can Do, where we're navigating the new work world.
Welcome to the Career Can Do podcast, a top global podcast dedicated to helping you navigate the new work world and beyond. My name is Ann Faremouth, and I'll be your host for this episode. And today, I'm just delighted to have a guest on my show that's got such good information for what we're all dealing with during these changing and challenging times. Linda Perry is a master mindset coach, business strategist, speaker, and recovering attorney who works with individuals, business owners, and their teams to become more self-driven and more successful. So many people these days get stuck on a plateau and don't know how to move forward. Linda uses a mindset-first approach to support individuals and teams to tap into their core motivations and strengths and free them from their blocks. Without further ado, and after that long introduction, help me welcome Linda Perry. Linda, say hello to everybody.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I've been looking forward to this all week so we can really dive in and help people. So thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And Linda is coming to us all the way from Lisbon, Portugal. She and I have a connection, though, because her former area where she grew up is in Chicago. I'm a Michigan girl, so we have that Midwest connection. But Linda, we're dealing with so many changes right now. And, as a recruiter on my side of the desk, I'm hearing so many complaints with this generational, as I call it, disconnect. All right. Older generations are complaining about younger generations. I mean, they complain about their work ethic, their communication styles and attitude. But you say that what we're experiencing with this Gen Z is different. Tell us a little bit about that. What is your take? I mean, let's talk first about this generational disconnect. I mean, what is your take on all that?
Yeah, I think that there's always this concept of a generational disconnect, right? The older generations feel as if they've somehow earned the right to say there's something different about younger generations. But I want to sort of emphasize that this isn't natural. This isn't what's normally happening. I think there's a disconnect because there's been so many changes in the workplace. There's been so many changes in the way technology impacts the way we work. There's been so many changes for particularly the younger generation and how they've learned to communicate that it's created this incredible gap so that it feels like the divide is no longer able to be bridged with the normal tools that we have been accustomed to using. And so there's this constant disconnect. There's a lot of complaining. There's a lot of sort of disappointment on both sides, I think. I think the younger generation tends to think that we're a little disconnected too. And so what we need to do is start to look at each other with different eyes, because I do believe this has more to do with the current environment than the necessary gap that always exists, right? And so I want to really, use this time to go deeper and explore some of that if we can. So here's what it really is. I think that this current generation, this Gen Z generation that's coming up into the workforce, is coming into a different type of workforce than we've ever experienced. There's the hybrid situation, there's the remote situation, and some, are having to go fully into offices. The young generation, those particularly that are entering into the workforce right now, experienced a different kind of learning. They ended up being really impacted by COVID. Whereas so many of us had the experience of going to an office where we were able to be mentored, whether that was good or bad, we were able to experience what it was like and learn on the job. And I think this current generation is facing a complete gap when it comes to that. Maybe they had internships. Maybe they had some opportunity to go in occasionally, but there is this lack of culture and they've been forced to sort of look online to learn. And I think there's so much missing when you are unable to have that kind of mentorship or interaction. Now, add to that, this is a generation that was raised with such different communication tools. I've never heard more complaints about a generation and their communication. And I'll be honest, they're true. However, here's why. I think that this generation has learned to communicate via phone, via text, and they have sort of no concept of some of the formal ways of communication or the informal ways that maybe we learned by going to an office. But they've also experienced online attacks their entire childhood. Whether they went on
by that online attack.
So they've seen bullying full force online, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's from other kids. It's not just in their day-to-day. We could go home and not experience it. Now they actually go home and are experiencing it. It's in their everyday invasion. So for them to be able to communicate or confront or to ask questions feels so much heavier than it might have for us. And I think we kind of miss some of that. And I don't think they have the words to even understand that that's some of their problems.
Okay, good point. Good point. You know what? I have to ask you, digress here for just a minute. You call yourself a recovering attorney. I know you were a criminal attorney for a long time. I mean, that's interesting, but is there any reason that because of your attorney experience that made you then seeing, some of these situations that didn't turn out really great, that even was more of an impetus to get you to get into this, to help people so that they could alleviate some of this horrible stuff that goes on when you have to hire a person like you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I did spend 17 years as a federal criminal defense attorney in Chicago. And what I learned is that people make mistakes and that many of the people that I served actually weren't bad people. It's just they really had no understanding of how to operate in the system or how to actually get ahead in the world. And I think that was a really strong impetus. I really wanted to understand, how does our brain work? How do we actually improve these kinds of things? It used to break my heart because watching people actually go back out into the world after, having served their time, trying to figure out where do I fit in now? And so there was a big impetus for me to really start to understand, if we can approach this from a greater understanding of how we're all wired, can we actually close the gap? Can we actually start to reduce some of the conflicts, the challenges, create better leaders? And I think that's really what drove me into the work that I do for the last decade. And I joke it's recovering because, look, I do respect what I learned as an attorney, and it carries with, because there's always the analysis, the looking, the researching, the going deeper. And that's always going to be with me.
I think so. But Linda, I think you really hit upon a critical point when you brought out just a little while ago about this challenge of communication and how the younger generation really hasn't learned how to do that. We didn't have phones. I'm a boomer, all right? We had to communicate. We didn't have a phone in our hand. And, we can't live now without our phones, all right? So technology, I think you hit on something very, very important here. Technology has changed our communication styles significantly, but that has a backlash effect. So, Linda, what are some of the ways leaders and mentors can help these Generation Z people, leverage their strengths and overcome this communication challenge that they grew up with? What do we do to fix it?
I think we can't disregard the importance of mentorship. And, I'm a Gen X. And so we also didn't have phones. We had to learn by following someone around. I had a lovely law partner who really made me follow him around everywhere, learn the art of communicating with everybody, let's say in a courtroom situation. And that's how I learned, was really learning to mirror, learning to reject and take the best of. We don't have those same kinds of opportunities, particularly in this hybrid online world. But I think what has to happen, and this is doubly important for all of us as leaders, is really understanding our own strengths and our own missions and our own goals. It starts with us. The better understanding we have of us and where we maybe get tripped up, the more empathy and understanding we may have for somebody else. I always say, know thyself first. If you want to lead others, if you want them to follow, know thyself first. Where are you getting stuck? So I generally work with business owners first to say, okay, I work with a tool called this why tool. And what is your why? What's your core motivation? What are some of your strengths? so that you can actually convey this to the people who work for you so they understand exactly what the purpose and mission is. I also then say, okay, let's start to really help this younger generation understand their own strengths, how they're wired. Look, this is the most emotionally intelligent generation that's come up. They have had different kinds of tools than we did, right? We were told to just go work, you were lucky, and suck it up, right? They understand work-life balance. However, what's incumbent upon us is to really help them understand their own strengths. They have strengths. And once they do, what I've noticed is, let's say I show somebody that they have a why of contribute. Well, somebody with a why of contribute really wants to support a mission. Well, then I know that that individual, their role is going to be a team player, and I'm going to put them in positions that allows them to support the mission in whatever their capacity is. And I'm going to highlight that for them. Because you see, if you have that for the younger generation, they then now can lean into that strength rather than being so afraid. Because what's really happening is that most everybody, doesn't matter across the generation, is operating from their own resistance and limiting beliefs. So I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. I'm afraid I'm stupid. I'm afraid whatever their own core belief is the thing that's leading. If we can teach them how to operate from their own strengths, we start to see different things. Because, truly, like I will say, I mean, they communicate differently. You also have to teach them. I teach anybody who works with me, please do not send me documents via text, right? For them, that's normal. But for us, that may not be workable. And so we have to set expectations, and we have to actually be very, very clear about what we want.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree with you. And it's funny when you were talking about that, I went and visited Greece, and I went to the Temple of Delphi, and the inscription on the Temple of Delphi is know thyself. And I have a 5-step method, and my first method is know thyself. And I think that's what you're saying. You're right. It all begins with us. And I also think when we know what our strengths and weaknesses are, and mainly, focus on those strengths, we can find a job that's more in alignment with who we are. And that makes the experience a lot less challenging, I think. All right. I mean, it's so exciting to me, Linda. I've been in this job a long time. I mean, I was a teenage recruiter. Now I'm doing this job almost 40 years. But when I go to these conferences, and I've got one coming up this week, and I see people I placed 10, 15 years ago, and they're still there and they're happy. And I think to myself, wow, this is great. But the reason I think is because they're in alignment with what their interests are, who they are, what they like to do. People that, are in alignment are going to be better performers. So I think that you really hit on something profound here. It starts with that individual being in alignment, knowing thyself, trying to understand their strengths and weaknesses, and then maybe feeling more confident when they come up against a challenge.
I think that I want to highlight that just for one more second. Like my why is better way. So what I learned from that is I'm always looking for a better way. I'm motivated by finding a better way. But what that also tells me is I should build nothing from scratch. For years, I was trying to build things from scratch when I realized that's not what I'm actually good at. So that whatever job I was in, I needed to actually have somebody start that first for me. And so I now can actually shore myself up with those people who really are good at that. Like somebody with a right way why might be really diligent and like to do those kinds of things. And so I can get the support I need so I can actually move through those blocks. And I think the more we can teach people how to be resourceful that way, the better they are, as you say, in alignment with what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes too, we have to, all of us, take stock of our strengths, but also our weaknesses, like you mentioned. I'm a boomer. I mean, I grew up, my dad told me, you just go in, you work hard, you don't ask a lot of questions, you just do it. And you go in early and you stay late. So, I mean, I work all the time. And so I look at some of the younger generation that has more work-life balance. And I think, well, I wish I could be that way, but we're different. We're wired different. And I think if we understand that at the core going in, then we can be a little bit more tolerant, maybe. Do you agree? I mean, what I hear from employers is, oh, Marianne, I interviewed this person, I love them, but they don't want to drive 15 miles. They want to work remote, like you said, or hybrid. I'm not doing that here. So there's this challenge right now. And the other thing I need to mention, the other big challenge we have is that we have an unprecedented talent shortage. Right now, post-COVID, we have all these jobs, we don't have enough people. And so the applicants are in the driver's seat. So I think employers, too, need to be a little more flexible and a little more open. I mean, I think the younger generation needs to be a little more open and tolerant as well. So I think there's a give and take on both sides. Do you agree with that?
100%. But I think the mistake people make is they come from this lack mindset in hiring. Oh, there's a shortage. I've got to grab the first person, or I have to sacrifice some of my own boundaries and values. And I think that's where some resentment can come in. That's where some challenges can come in. And I think there is the idea of being more flexible versus compromising on your values. And I think that has to be super clear in the mindset of the business owner, because otherwise it's really setting yourself up constantly for being disappointed in the fact that the person is going to be part remote or whatever the case may be. I think flexibility has to come into the picture. And I think also for the younger generation, that has to be part of it as well. I was speaking to my niece recently. She's like, oh, they're making me come into the office. And I sort of laughed at her. I said, I understand working by the pool is nice. And what about if you can look at it from the perspective of you might start to learn even more? And she said, I hadn't thought of that. And so if they can start to reframe things for both sides, so there's flexibility as opposed to forcing one side into it or the other, there's more of a focus on the mission. Again, it comes back down to relaying what are we doing here and getting the buy-in for that. And I think that's super important so that a company can grow, right? The company culture can grow. So really the employees and even the business owner can grow, because otherwise it becomes a really untenable situation.
You know, what you're saying is profound. And I think what I'm hearing you say overall is that we both have to be flexible. Both all generational sectors have to be flexible. We both all have to be willing to give. It can't be my way or the highway on anybody's side. Yes, there's generational differences, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. You know, we all care. We all have feelings. We all have determination and goals and all this and that. But at the end of the day, let's make it harmonious as we can. And let's try to understand the other person, where they're coming from, so that we can be a little more tolerant. You know, I've just told somebody today, they had an interview, and I said, you always want to start the interview with gratitude. You always want to go into the interview. Thank you for the opportunity of letting me come and interview with you today. Who's saying that wouldn't make the other person feel good? All right.
Yeah.
Thankful. Because all I hear is all these attitudes. Oh, Marianne, these attitudes are horrible. You start the interview with a gratitude attitude. How is that going to set the tone for the rest of the interview? Hello. I think it's going to be something. So I think your work is so necessary and so important. And I'm just so thrilled to know you and to have met you, because this podcast was one that I really wanted to have on the show on this subject, because my employers and candidates are really struggling, Linda. They're struggling to find the solution to make it work, because there's a disconnect. We're getting near the end here. And I always like to leave our listeners with two salient points. And, you know, I know we've talked about the why. I mean, Simon Sinek made that pretty famous in his book, but understanding your core motivation, your why, will help you lean into your strengths. So tell us a little bit about how that is such an important mission for the work environment, for everybody to understand their why.
Yeah, I think this is really important to understand how you're wired. I mean, it's funny because I'm now in my 50s and I spent so much of my life trying to understand how I was wired. I knew that it felt like I was wearing a sweater that was too small for so many years, but I, like you, worked hard just to work hard. Now I work hard out of joy and knowing that what I'm doing is contributing to the world. I think understanding our why will really gets to the core of who we are, how we get stuck, and the pathway for growth. Because the truth is that when you really understand your why, the how and the what become easy. And so many people really don't have a sense of that, and they think they have to search outside of them, but it's really inside us. And really, like, I will tell you, just this assessment that I do surprised me when I got certified in it. I wasn't expecting the world out of it, but it's turned out to be this beautiful tool to unlock the world for others, because it really just gets to the heart of, yes, that's me. That makes sense to me finally. Now I know what I can share with the world, because the fact is so many people just want to contribute. And that's really one of the things that's so important about really understanding your why.
Okay. And what would you say the second one is? I mean, maybe the second one is, you know, if we can all start blaming and judging. Okay. I mean, talk about that a little bit. I mean, it's easy to just say, oh, they did this, or I did that, or I don't like this, and this is really bothering me. But how can we, instead of blame or judge, how can we look at enhancing the strengths of each person? How can we do that?
One of the first things I learned as a coach is when you point a finger at someone else, there's three pointing back at you. And so inevitably we blame and we judge and we resist because we're really not sure what we can do. It feels good for about 30 seconds, but inevitably, you know, that feeling turns on us. we recognize that there's something in us. And so rather than blame or judge or point fingers at this current generation, the better question to ask is, how can I serve as a bridge? What is it here that I can help them understand? And sometimes it just takes taking a deep breath. I know I run a second business with my daughter who's in her 20s, and it can be maddening. And I just want to tell her how to do things or snap at her. And I have to take a deep breath and say, this is an opportunity for me to show her the way. No one has so far. And so it's incumbent upon me that if I'm going to help this person become a better employee, become a better team member, become a better leader, then it's a better question to say, how can I support you? And really understanding, is it a communication issue? Is it a leadership issue? Is it a time management issue? What is at the core of this? And giving them the tools and the opportunity to remedy it, because chances are no one's shown them yet. And so it feels so much better to open a door than to point a finger.
Wonderful. Linda, you are so profound, and I feel so grateful and honored to have you on Career Can Do. If our listeners want to get a hold of you, how do they do that? I mean, all this will be on my website, faremouth.com. But if they want to reach out to you directly, how can they do that?
Please find me on my website at lindamperry.com. Also on LinkedIn, you can find me at Linda M. Perry. I always put that middle initial because there is a rock star with my name, so it gets a little confusing. But please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always willing to answer. And this has been such a joy to be on this podcast because I feel that we are really kindred spirits about the way we approach this. And I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing.
Ditto. I'm just so grateful to know you and to have you on the show. And I know we're going to keep in touch. So thank you all for listening today to Career Can Do. This is Linda Perry, mindset coach, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you. Bye-bye. We thank you for tuning in to our Career Can Do podcast. We make no guarantees on results for your particular quest, but we hope you enjoy the information presented. The views and opinions expressed in this program are solely that of the guest or speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Ann Faremouth and Faremouth and Company. Thank you.